Okay. Give me a moment to get. Okay, we can maybe see my staffing screen. Yeah. Great. Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to our Mobile Market Coalition July webinar on staffing and hiring. My name is Sam Lev. I'm a program coordinator with the Mobile Market Coalition. As we, I think, know, the Mobile Market Coalition is based out of the University at Buffalo's Veggie Van Training Center. But we are a national-based organization. Typically, I find myself in Phoenix, Arizona, but today I'm in Southwest Virginia, having just gotten to visit some mobile markets and my old stomping grounds. I think probably many of you in the room are already familiar, but if you're not yet, the Mobile Market Coalition really exists to position mobile markets as equitable solutions for a resilient food system. We do so by kind of focusing on research, technical support, advocacy, and collaboration. I know, one of the things I love about mobile markets is it sits at the intersection of so many things, as does our coalition, right? So we sit at the intersection of social economic justice, food distribution. We stand in alliance with researchers, as well as many of you in the room, operators and stakeholders and advocates within our field as well. We're going to talk a little bit today about a few things, all related to kind of staffing, hiring, and the like. This webinar is coming on the heels of a recent update we did to the Veggie Van Toolkit. As I think probably all of you have seen, the Veggie Van Toolkit is our web-based resource guide and kind of database of best practices, templates, tools, all focused on planning, launching, and growing your mobile farmers market. I'm going to share a little bit about kind of the recent toolkit expansion that we did on staffing, recruiting, hiring. And we've got two great mobile market folks here in the room today, representing two really excellent mobile markets and experienced markets in the field. Alistar Harris and from Shalom Farms, and Samantha Pounder from the Arcadia Sustainable Food Centers mobile market, respectively in Richmond, Virginia, and the DC area. They're each going to be talking about some of the things that they do to make sure they're recruiting and hiring good teams, as well as building an appropriate and equitable structure and training and caring for the team members once they're on the market. We are recording today. So I'll be sending this recording out early next week. So you can view it again as many times as you want, because I know the information is going to be incredible. And if you have questions today, I would say, let's feel free to drop them in the chat or hang on to them. Let me just let a few folks in here. Hang on to them until the end. We've saved plenty of room at the end of the session today for some question and answer, for some open discussion. So I know a lot of folks are thinking really innovatively about, and have great questions as well about how we build strong teams in our mobile market organizations. So I made sure to reserve a good 15 minutes towards the end of the day today to have some of those discussions. Just briefly, if you haven't seen it yet, I would really encourage you to check out the most recent Veggie Van Toolkit update. We expanded out the staffing section. Historically, there was a space that had a few different options and job roles and responsibilities based on the original, the birth of the Veggie Van Training Center was a mobile farmers market called the Veggie Van in and around Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And so a lot of the original resources come from that mobile market's kind of staffing structure and plans. So we really expanded that out with this new update to talk about a variety of staffing structures, whether it's just you running the whole show by yourself, or you're a part of a much larger organization and trying to orchestrate a team of program managers, support staff, and so on. And so there's a few different kind of paths you can take to explore staffing structure, maybe based on the capacity of your organization, the specializations and trainings that you have, or simply the size of your team. Um, we talked a little bit in this update about recruiting and hiring. So, in some interviews with experienced mobile markets, we learned some interesting points about how mobile markets create strong job posts, what kind of required versus preferred skill sets and qualities they look for in their teams. I think Alistair is going to talk a little bit about that from his perspective as well. And then we also talk about training and standard operating procedures. So how do we make sure folks feel safe and supported on the road? How do we make sure we've systematized our training so that the product and the services that we offer are the same from one team member to the next and from one location to the next? This is all built on the kind of studied best practices and interviews that we do at the Mobile Market Coalition. So all of it is really grown out of extensive kind of research and interviews with experienced mobile markets. So what you're seeing in here is the best practices kind of gathered from the community of experienced operators. I don't think any of them are in the room today, but I would love to thank and highlight two of the partners that provided case studies and in-depth interviews to this end. Both Project Grows in Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, as well as the Food Mill in Columbus, Georgia. Both were very effusive with sharing in some of the ways that they address staffing on their teams. So shout out to them and thanks so much. And I hope you will check out the Veggie Van Toolkit's recent staffing update. If you haven't visited it yet, you'll have to go to mobilemarketcoalition.org/toolkit. You'll complete a brief survey and you'll get the password to access the protected pages. If you have saved that password, you can go straight to mobilemarketcoalition.org/staffing.html to kind of read through some of these newer resources. I'm going to stop sharing now and I'm going to hand it off to Alistar Harris. Feel free to introduce yourself and dig in, Alistar, to kind of how you all recruit, hire, and build a strong team.
Thanks, Sam. And thanks everyone for showing up this afternoon. I know it's Friday and we all are probably ready for the weekend and to get a break. But thanks for being here. And I work with Shalom Farms in Richmond, Virginia. And we are a nonprofit farm and food justice organization. And we run a mobile market program and have for the last almost 10 years now. I've been involved with it for about 7 years. And we have about 15 different stops throughout the week, Tuesdays through Saturdays. And then we have a small team of a couple people working those markets throughout the week, but a lot of volunteer assistance on our mobile market program as well. And so, yeah, it counts up to a lot of markets throughout the year. We sell at our markets mostly vegetables and some fruit that we grow on our farms. And we have 2 farm locations that we grow on and source from, and then a little bit that we buy from other producers and growers in our Central Virginia region. Things that we don't grow on our farms, especially tree fruit, and then watermelons and melons in general and things like that. And we subsidize that with a little bit of grocery items as well, basic things like honey, sometimes some meat, poultry, and then eggs and jams and jellies and things like that, shelf-stable items. So that's a brief overview of our mobile market and our organization. And in fact, on Sunday, we're celebrating our 15th year anniversary. It feels like a big deal to be at this point, 15 years into it. It feels good. There's a lot of good partners that we get to work with, and just yesterday I was with Sam and a few others in Stanton, Virginia, with Project Grows, where they run a nonprofit and mobile market as well. We got to visit that mobile market, which was a lot of fun. I like seeing other operations in practice. But I was just impressed by, and I'm always impressed by, the amount of impact that mobile markets have across the country, no matter where you are. There's a lot of good work being done on the ground. And I'm really glad to be part of the Mobile Market Coalition and seeing it grow. and all the things coming down the line for what we can do. For today, I'll talk and touch on a little bit about strategies for advertising. So how do we sift out and look for qualified candidates, and then choosing the right candidates also. But I want to reference also what Sam said, which is in the toolkit update around staffing and hiring, and then structure. You can also find some of this information, and it's in a different format, but there's a lot of good tools on there. So please go check that out if you haven't yet. I've been hiring for mobile markets now for the last 4 seasons, 5 seasons, in fact. At the beginning of the first year or two, I was just hiring volunteers or interns for the mobile markets, paid interns. And so it wasn't quite a full-time or part-time staff member, but it was still a process to just, advertise and then interview, and then once they are hired, then to do a little bit of training for those volunteers and interns. And the last 3 seasons, I've hired an additional staff member, a contract staff person, which is seasonal. And in our case, for Richmond, Virginia, our markets run typically from late April or early May through December. And that's sort of then the contract that we hire for, or the part-time seasonal position that we hire for. This year, 2024, we have 2 staff members running our 14 different sites, which means each of them run about 7 different sites and add a Saturday site every other week to that schedule. And it means that they run each either 1 or 2 markets per day, starting on a Tuesday, ending on a Saturday. And so those 2 people, one role is, the title is a mobile market coordinator, and the other role is a mobile market associate. And the way we distinguish, in fact, between that is that they had different hourly positions. So the coordinator has a full-time seasonal position, meaning 40 hours a week. And then the associate position is part-time, about 20 to 25 hours a week. And they have very similar job descriptions. And we look for the same kind of skills and experience and qualities in people. But if somebody wants more flexibility, then maybe they apply for the associate level role. And if they want, full-time for the whole season, then maybe the coordinator role is better for them. So the one thing that we've done over the last 5 years, I would say, is formalize a lot of these hiring and staffing practices with hiring and staffing manuals, and part of our human resource or human capital resources, and making those things formalized. And that's been a big deal for us to get to the point of formalizing and not having to recreate that wheel every time that we hire for these roles. Across our organization, we also have standardized job descriptions across the different departments. And that's been a nice thing as well. And so I'll say that when we think about advertising for the roles here in Central Virginia, one of the things I begin with is to just, with the existing partners or mobile market sites or partnerships that we have, one of my first goals is to reach out to some of those sites and partners, and to see if there are any community members and networks that they have that may be suitable for the candidates that we're looking for. So that's something that I always start with, is to, and so that if we're hiring for a position to start in May, we start advertising by mid-February or so. So we give ourselves 2.5 to 3 months to try and find the right candidates. So start with speaking to partners and mobile market sites and that immediate community. But then we utilize what maybe a lot of us do already also, as online job boards and job posting boards. One of the ones we utilize here in Richmond is our community foundation and their network and hiring platform. So it's something where we can post on. It's a free service to nonprofits that are members of that community foundation here in Richmond. And then we have maybe 4 or 5 different other sites, mostly online, and networks that we post on. 2 other big ones that we recruit through is the Virginia Association of Biological Farming. So they're sort of the organic and biological farming association for the state. Again, we can list posting on there for free. And then the other one is with the Virginia Association of Farmers Markets, Virginia Farmers Market Association. And I find that even just between those two, we get several candidates often apply and reference that they, saw the posting on those 2 sites. And then there are a few educational institutions in our region, Virginia Commonwealth University, Virginia State University, Virginia Tech. And so we post or make an announcement or on a job posting board there also. One recent tool that's been useful for us has been the Mobile Market Google group, and just, making the posting on there and saying the opportunity and speaking about our organization and the role and compensation. So that's broadly the kinds of places that we advertise through or try and recruit through. We haven't used and utilized sites like Indeed or Glassdoor or LinkedIn very much, and partly because we haven't seen much success with that early on when we tried to use those services, and so we haven't tapped into those really. And we find that we get suitable and qualified candidates even just through the ones I've listed so far. So then once we get an application in, what I will do is to acknowledge all those applications. And so it's an email usually that acknowledges that receiving their information and resumes and contact details. And then I'll schedule a phone interviews with everyone who applies, no matter how many apply. I send out a request for an interview just over the phone. Usually it's about 15 to 20 minutes. And in my experience, not everybody replies to that, which is also sort of a weeding out the candidates, that if they don't respond to that email, then it's unlikely then that they will be interviewed in person. And so the phone interview, if I get somebody, available for a phone interview, it lasts about 15 minutes. And it's really just for me to get a sense quickly about themselves. I usually ask a question about just what made them apply for the position, and then a quick review of their role itself. So what we are looking for, both those things that Sam mentioned earlier about required skills versus preferred skills. And then I check about their availability, that they are available for the position from start to end, and any conflicts that may arise in there. And then I give them a quick opportunity to ask some initial questions. But that's the extent of a phone interview. And then based on any information and how they respond to that phone interview, those phone interview questions, I will then schedule or decide to schedule an in-person interview. And if I just think about this last round of hiring for 2024, we had about 15 applicants for the 2 roles. And I had scheduled, of course, I had invited them all for phone interviews. Only 10 of those, in fact, replied to my email, and then I scheduled interviews with them. And from those 10, then we had scheduled 6 in-person interviews. So we had about 3 candidates that we interviewed in person for each position. And then we have an in-person interview, and that's usually at our office. It's with, at least our policy states that it will always be 2 people, both the direct supervisor and then our chief of staff, or the direct supervisor, and another one of our directors from a different department that will interview any candidate. One person from any team cannot interview a candidate alone. And there's hiring practices and policies that are embedded in that. And then usually those interviews are about 30 to 45 minutes, up to an hour long, depending on the candidate and depending on how much information we want to know, and also how many questions they have about the organization or about the role that they're interested in. And then, and maybe Sam, I can share the kinds of questions that we ask in our interviews, during our interviews, to you after this call. And you can include that as part of sending out things. But what we're looking for, right, is thinking through questions like, as I mentioned earlier, their interest in the work or our organization, or in the field in general, and thinking about mobile markets, thinking about food access, thinking about food justice. I ask about direct experience with markets or with customer service, and things about either challenges or things that they enjoy. I ask questions around sort of trying to demonstrate their capacity for both awareness, sort of social awareness, but also things like adversity. How do they respond to that? Do they have a particular example of an experience that when things were challenging or difficult? What else was going on? Can they, say how they worked through that, how they solved for it? Since mobile markets out in the community, there's always a question about if you are not from that community, how do you respond, and how in the past have you responded to being an outsider to a community? And that gives me a sense of both their own personal awareness, but also awareness around issues of both race and diversity, and the intersection of socioeconomic conditions and issues that people are struggling with. And then one of the other questions we ask is also about, you are primarily responsible for running and taking charge of a mobile market and making it your own. So thinking about their own experiences, work or school or life, when they've been the person in charge, and what does that mean to them? What sort of strategies have they used in the past? When there are conflicts or when people are upset about something, in a customer service situation, how do they respond to it? How do they deal with it? What are some of the tools and practices that they rely on? And then there's usually, of course, a section for them to both inquire deeper into the questions that we had or hold, and then also for them to ask questions that they bring or that they're wondering about and thinking about and sitting with. So that's also included. And then once that concludes, my co-interviewer and I will then review those in-person interviews. We'll go through each candidate and then make a selection based on the results of those interviews and the phone interview and the resume. And then if we decide to or pinpoint one or two candidates for two roles, we will then do reference checks for those two candidates if it ends up being two candidates. And those are done by phone. My primary choice is always by phone. And if not, an email as a follow-up to that. And particularly, I'm asking about, or I'm, checking with the reference that this is the role that they're applying for. And particularly, I ask about either a skill or an experience that they highlighted through those interviews, and any positive feedback they could give me about the candidate, or any challenges that they experienced while they were a supervisor of that employee. And then once we do a reference check, and we are happy with the candidate, then we would, of course, extend an offer to the individual. And once they can either accept, of course, or not accept. If they accept, then it's easy. Then we can proceed with a contract. And if they don't accept, then we will then look at the other two candidates that we interviewed in person to see if there's then the next suitable candidate based on those others that we interviewed. And so that's a rough process of what we do, thinking about advertising and how we try and recruit. The one thing I would say that we've had a struggle with is getting more diverse candidates to apply for our roles, and diverse along a few different points. And the thing that we are aware of is that we want to be the kind of organization that is welcoming to as many different different intersectionalities as possible. And then we've also had a strategic goal of becoming more of an organization that makes space for Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. And we're not successful yet. We're trying to align our hiring and staffing practices to those strategic goals. And still, I find it hard to recruit more Black, Brown, and Indigenous candidates for the roles that we have. And there's equity questions in there that we can talk about, which we don't have time for right now. But at least that's where we are at with it. Any thoughts or questions about anything I said so far? I know I talked maybe a little fast.
That was great, Alistair. Thanks so much for sharing. I think to make sure that we save enough time for Samantha to share, we'll hold questions. So if you have them, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll get to everybody's questions, I think, after Samantha finishes. I appreciate you sharing your experiences on the hiring side, Alistair, both the places that I know a lot of people are trying to figure out the right places to share job postings, within the community, and some of the other things you listed sounded really great. And I'm sure there are corollaries in everybody's state and region around the country. I appreciated you sharing about kind of how you systematize the hiring process over the years. Something that I know I struggled with kind of haphazardly for a few years. And so thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I'm going to pitch to Samantha now. And Samantha's really excited. I think I'm excited to hear Samantha talk about some of the things that Arcadia does once you've got folks on your team.
Yeah. So Arcadia, just a little background. Our farm is in Alexandria, Virginia, where we grow about 50% of what we sell. Our warehouse, or what we call HQ, is in Hyattsville, Maryland. I don't know where everyone is calling from. So if you're not familiar with the area, Hyattsville is in Maryland, just north east of the city. That's where our warehouse is. Our trucks live there. We have 4,000 square feet of warehouse, 400 square feet of cooling space. We have a small office there, etc. Our service location is DC, though, DC proper, the city. We have 8 markets every week, Wednesday through Saturday, so 2 markets per day. 2 separate teams deploy from headquarters to the 2 different locations, do their markets, come back to headquarters to unload. We have a very similar product mix than Alistar described. So we have mostly fruits and vegetables, but we also source poultry, pork, beef, eggs, some grocery products, jam, etc., from 100-mile radius of DC. So all local. And we also participate in matching. So we match on SNAP dollars or food stamps, senior FMMP, and WIC FMMP. So all of those benefits are doubled. We also accept Produce Plus. We just got up on Produce RX or Fresh Connect cards. So we're taking all different types of tender, cash, obviously credit as well. We had sort of similar, I'd say, hiring practices. We post on primarily Indeed. So there's a listing. I'll get to the team in just a second, Sam. I know you said don't talk about this, but we bring people on usually from Indeed. I conduct virtual interviews. I typically take about 45 minutes. I just do one interview. Once I set that up, it's a video call. I ask them a lot of questions, obviously, like why do they want to work at Arcadia? What sets us apart? That kind of thing. I also have moved into asking questions that test people's locus of control. So kind of like, are you able to take responsibility for things, et cetera? So I usually ask about someone's, tell me about a project or a goal that you've had that you reached. And then like, what was it that ultimately got you over the finish line? And then I do the flip side of like, tell me about a goal that you had that you didn't, achieve. And then, why did you fall short? Why did you course correct? And just kind of gauging, how people see themselves and fitting into the world and taking responsibility for their actions and things like that. Sometimes if I really connect with someone and we just are jiving, I'll offer them a verbal offer on the initial call, and then I'll just send it in paper after for them to decide. I mean, via email for them to decide. Sometimes I just kind of wait and see what other candidates come through. We typically get a very large number of applicants on Indeed, and then I cut that down. And then depending on how those calls go, we make our final decisions. But anyway, moving into kind of the labor model that we have. This is my 4th season managing this program. We've done different things every single year. I don't know if I suggest that, but I am a person where, it can be very hard in what we do. Like in the midst of the season, it's very hectic. So it's hard to implement change like immediately. So we often come up with changes we want to make for the future and then implement them in the off season. With that said, this season, I completely blew up the labor model. Previously, we've done various different things, but we had a lot more people staffing markets. Typically, there would be about 5 people staffing markets, 2 of which one would be a manager and one would be an associate. They would start and end at headquarters. So 2 people would come, load the truck, drive to market. 2 or 3 more people would meet them in the field and work like a short shift, we called it. And then those people would leave from market. The one manager and the one associate would come back to headquarters to unload. So we had this thing going on where there was managers, there was associates, there was people working the long shift, working the short shift. Ultimately, I just didn't think that was working for a variety of reasons. You know how the season can go. I don't know if you're familiar with global warming. I don't know. DC has been 101 for like days on end. It's really tough conditions to hold these markets. We're outside, there's no shade, everything's paved. So people would burn out. It's Friday and you have a 3.5-4 hour shift that's going to take you 35 minutes to get to on public transportation. And it's Friday, you're like, I don't really want to come in today. So we had a lot of people calling out. Then that would leave a burden on the people that did show up, kind of punishing the people that did come to work because they're doing more lifting, et cetera. And I didn't like the idea that I felt like the team was falling apart. So in attempts to kind of create more teamwork, a more cohesive team, I actually did away with managers, if you will, and associates, and just everybody's coming in as a team member. One reason is that the managers really didn't have like specifically much more training or unique skills. It was kind of like by nature of when they applied and what a position they applied for that they got that role. So anyway, I did away with all of that. Everybody does everything. And I did away with the short shift. So every single person starts and ends from headquarters, but I decreased the number of people doing it because my thought process was if I can get people who really buy into the mission, who really want to be a part of the team and are here to like get the job done from start to finish, they will come, they'll show up for their shifts. They'll all work as a team. I can kind of more naturally delegate who does what based off of real thing. Like some people don't drive at all. Obviously, those are not going to be people that get trained to drive the trucks, right? People who are confident drivers and had like a clear driving record. Okay, I would approach them. Do you want to drive? Let's do some driver training with you. You can be someone when you're scheduled, you typically will be a truck driver. If there's 2 people who are truck drivers on the same shift, it's up to them to work out like empowering the staff to kind of make decisions for themselves. Someone who happens to be better with numbers, maybe they're the person that gets trained to do the shift notes at the end of the night, do all the reporting for us. I also bumped everyone's starting pay up. So instead of having this tiered managers and associates, everybody came in like almost at what I was paying managers. So we start everyone at $20 an hour. I'm not sure where you're calling from. That may not be feasible given your area. DC, the minimum wage is almost $18 now. So we are just outpacing minimum wage here. But but everybody's coming in at $20 an hour. I commit to staffing 3 people per market. Last season, I had a baby. I carried my baby on my chest when I worked market. I would typically work Fridays at Edgewood because it's closest to my house, and that was easiest with a small baby. And I worked that location with one other woman, numerous weeks, just the 2 of us and my baby, 2.5 people. And I knew that the workload was possible for 2 people, especially if you don't have a baby strapped to your chest. So like I would never ask my staff to do something that I wasn't capable of doing myself. But with that said, I started staffing 3 people per market. But if 2 people end up working, we know we still can do it. So what I did in that situation where is if there was a call out last minute, the 3rd person couldn't come in, or simply, I know Anacostia is pretty slow. It's not the last weekend of the month when people are racing to finish their benefits. We aren't really anticipating a crowd. It's also maybe going to rain, so maybe market's not going to be crazy. The 3 people who are scheduled, you work it out amongst themselves, right? Empowering people to kind of make decisions. So-and-so, you've been working the last 3 days in a row. It's super hot. Me and this other person, we got it. We'll just work. They'll kind of okay that with me, and I'll take the 3rd person off of the schedule, and the 2 people will work. When 2 people work instead of 3 people, I introduce something called the short staff bonus. So I pay staff $40 extra for that market a piece. So essentially 2 hours to their paycheck. Just as a simple, like, maybe it's not a ton of money, but it also does help you feel compensated for the fact that you physically carried more. You opened all the tents with just 1 person. You carried all the melons off of the truck. You did more physical work that day. And so I just want to kind of say, like, I see you. I am attempting, we don't have all the money in the world, but we are attempting to compensate you for that. And also to mitigate kind of these grumblings of mid-season burnout and, so-and-so there's no room for like someone to not be pulling their weight. Everybody's all in. Everybody's that's working is starting and finishing at the warehouse. They're all getting the job done, and they're getting paid like a little bit more than we have in prior years to do it. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of the model. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but I think that's pretty much the main gist of it.
Thanks, Samantha. I was so excited when I heard you and Pam talking about this a while back, and I think it's a really interesting way to think about like how your team kind of is cared for and compensated when things get hard. I love this idea that this addresses like summer burnout by recognizing that things are maybe more difficult in the heat of the moment, and that I come from the restaurant world, so I also know really acutely how much harder it is when there's like 50% fewer people, right? And so I really love it. I like this. To me, I'm also hearing kind of on the financial side that the budget is set for 3 people per stop, right? So like when you cost out your season and staffing line items, that's kind of how you think about it. And so it's not that you're like saving money, right? You're not saving money when someone doesn't show up or when things shift around, but you're also recognizing, people are working, people are getting the same job done, right? And that's what, like, the job costs the amount of money, not the people. And so I really appreciate that. Feel free to drop questions in the chat, everybody. Samantha's got one, Steph's got one. I've got a couple of my own as they go ahead. So Samantha, go ahead and
yeah. So historically, we actually had a school bus that was converted, and customers would shop on the bus, and then they'd check out. That was very difficult because it requires a CDL, and so that was a barrier for hiring, and it's seasonal, and CDLs get paid a lot of money in this area, so it was just really difficult. Currently, we have 3 different vehicles. We only use primarily 2 of them, but then somehow one's always in the shop, so we're just like cycling through. We have 2 refrigerated box trucks you can use a regular driver's license for. And then we have a Sprinter van, which also you can use a regular license. One thing that I actually did forget, so thanks for jogging my memory, is that in one of our trucks, there are 3 seats. So all 3 people will go to and from market together in the actual truck. The other truck, actually both other trucks only have 2 seats. So two people will ride in the truck and one person will follow behind in their personal vehicle, and then we reimburse for mileage based off of the federal rates. That had been done in prior years, but not last year, and then we kind of reintroduced it. So one thing that I do look at, that I do ask in the interview is, do you have a personal vehicle or access to a personal vehicle, all the time, sometimes, etc. And just in terms of scheduling, it's not a requirement, but I do have to have per day, I have to have one person who has a personal vehicle to follow behind.
Thanks for answering that question, and thanks for sharing the labor model, Samantha. I wonder, one question I have, as any of you others, feel free to drop them in the chat or to unmute. One question I had about, both of you mentioned kind of the interview process. I've heard a couple of other folks in the field talk about success doing kind of trial shifts with their maybe one or two top candidates. You guys thought about or done this yourselves?
No, we haven't done anything like that. I mean, the nature of how it works for us is that it's nothing until it's everything, right? Like our first day of market season is June 1st. That's when Produce Plus comes out. Everyone's coming to sign their cards. There's like no trial. There's no stage, if you will. It's
Because
just
you're hiring before the season
we
starts,
hire
and there's no
before the
practice to be
season
had.
starts, and then it's absolute go time. One other thing I was going to mention that I do differently than Alistar, because I've gotten burned before, is I don't start hiring anywhere near that early. I used to feel like I was procrastinating if I hadn't gotten a posting up by March. Now I'm not tripping. I post in May to start for June 1st, because I used to hire people, bring them on. Someone's great. They're already filled out all their documents and everything. And then come day one, they don't show up because it's been 2 months since we last spoke and they found another job that is more lucrative, or it's not seasonal, or so I kind of leave everything to the end, the last minute.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Samantha. Sam, we don't do sort of a trial, but we do tend to have our mobile market staff on board a couple of weeks before our season begins. So for those first 2 weeks, it's both orientation to the organization, and then they get to work on the different parts of the organization as well. So they'll get to spend time on our farm and work with the farm team. They'll get to spend time with our development and fundraising team. They'll get to spend time in the office and meet all the different admin people. And then we'll visit all the market sites and give them sort of an overview. I train them on the vehicles. I train them on the farmer's register system, the checkout system. And then we meet with partners, all those mobile market sites where we run a market at. We'll meet with the partners and talk about the history, et cetera, et cetera. And usually that's enough time to get somebody on board, and it so far has worked out well. And sometimes, I speak about, like, we try and do this like 2-3 months in advance. Sometimes it comes down to a few weeks. I have somebody now who I'm replacing to do mid-August through mid-December, because one of our mobile market staff is going on maternity leave. And I thought I'd get it done earlier, but I haven't gotten it done. We don't have a candidate in place yet. So I have a couple of weeks, to hire somebody, and then they will have to start the beginning of August. So, it sort of depends on the time of year as well.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. I think my friends here at the Elite Mobile Market in Roanoke were talking about trial shifts, and they operate year round, so they didn't have the kind of challenge that Samantha has with once you're on, you're on. And so they were able to bring in some folks to see how they responded to stressful situations, see how readily they kind of jumped in and started engaging with customers, see how they kind of interact in different communities. And so I think it was really illuminating for them to get a couple of folks in to do trial shifts, and really make it easier for them to select the perfect candidate. I think they compensate everybody somehow for those trial shifts. And so I'd have to ask a little bit more about the details, but I think that certainly is fair and appropriate if you're you ask them to kind of do some work for a half a day or so to get going. Steph also mentioned, the practice is to include current mobile market staff, right, in the interview process. Yeah, thanks, Alistair. I really like this too. And Steph, maybe you can share a little bit about why if you want, but it sounds to me like that might allow for, continuation of the mission, for understanding that your staff knows kind of what's important and what your customers are like, and the way that you all really implement the program, and your mobile market staff, the boots on the ground, so to speak, probably know that as well as anybody, and the rigors of the job, right?
It's so true, Sam. We were on a different call and you talked about a lot of mobile market folks having some restaurant experience. I do not have that, nor do a lot of folks on the team. And it is a very intimate workspace. We operate out of school buses where, as Samantha talked about previous models for her, people come on and shop. So you are like essentially, this is sort of crude, but like stuck with this other person multiple days a week for 10 hours a day. So having people that are in that position being able to have a say in who we bring in, I think is critical for success. And then this trial shift idea, I just want to note, not only I think is that beneficial for the people that are hiring, but also for the person that is applying. You can dream all day long what a job would look like or feel like, and to actually have that experience, making sure it's a good fit both on the organizational level, but also the person taking on the role. So thanks for calling that out. I think I'm going to try it.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. And I remember, I think Samantha was nodding her head when I was talking about coming from the restaurant world. Staging in fine dining is super common, and we're a niche industry, right? So anyone that's hiring in a city is probably not going to find a number of candidates with specific mobile market experience under their belt, right? And so we've got to look to these adjacent industries to find some of those transferable skill sets, working under pressure, timing, things like that, lifting, carrying, the physical nature of a lot of the mobile market work. And so, I see a lot of corollaries there, and skill sets that kind of apply the same. And also, yeah, I think that kind of idea of exposing folks to what the mobile market is really all about, right, can only, it can't happen quite as easily on paper as it can happen in real life. And so I'm curious to see how people, find success with it, and how they kind of the nuts and bolts of doing those trial shifts and compensating applicants for that time really works.
Yeah, I have a wonderful story about one of our current market team members. Is that she started out at the beginning of last year as a customer. So she would come to the market, shop with us. And by the middle of the season, we were hiring for community advocates. And she was super excited and applied for the community advocate role, which is a paid help us, recruit, help us promote and advertise the market in their neighborhood. We hired her for that, which for her, she loved doing that. She was working part-time and wanted to do something else. And then she got excited about the idea of potentially doing some other role with us in the future. And when we hired early this season for markets, she applied for it. She had talked to us a little bit about it at the end of last year, saying this would be amazing, it would be so lovely. And we could see by just her demonstration of being a community advocate and the way that she was a customer with us, a shopper with us to begin with, that she had the capacity, skills, experience, the aptitude, the awareness, all of that. And she went through the interview process, and she was by far one of the best candidates that we've had. And so now she's a market operator. So it's been nice to sort of see also, or look for opportunities where people who are in our existing circles already can become something in a different way, in a different role with the organization, which has been a nice thing for us.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. I agree. It may kind of seem obvious saying what I'm about to say, but certainly markets that do robust kind of work with volunteers, interns, community ambassadors, a lot of them have had success that I hear time and again, kind of with the pipeline of of that entry position, that volunteer position into full-time paid staff. I think that's a natural fit. You get that experience level, you get to see what each other is all about. So I hear that over and over again in my interviews. I'd love to ask, maybe Alistar and or Samantha, you could share this verbally if anyone else wants to put this in the chat too. I thought a lot in the Veggie Van Toolkit update about kind of what are some of those preferred skill sets or traits that you look for in team members that you're applying for. What makes the best kind of staff person that you bring on your team? There are a few things that you can read through in the toolkit that I highlight that I've heard from interviews, but I'm always curious to see what are the one or two traits that people look for. We talked about CDL or the physical nature of the job, being able to work outdoors, right? Some of those are kind of required for a lot of mobile market positions, but what are those things that you really prioritize on maybe the soft skill or trait side instead of the required skill set side?
I look for people who make an emphasis on communicating, or specifically being a part of a team. That is something that I think it is apparent whether or not it will hold up in real life is separate, but I do think that there are people who I found really want to be a part of a team, not necessarily that they want to be best friends with all their coworkers, but that they want to be able to communicate openly. They want to be able to, accept responsibility for things that they've done wrong or that they can do better. I do specifically ask about how do you take feedback? So imagine that it's in the middle of a rush, you're doing something wrong. We can't schedule a meeting and sit down and talk about it later. We need to address it right in the moment. When it comes to those in the moment corrections, if you will, basically, in its most basic sense, how do you take feedback or criticism? And I like people who answer with things like, no problem, as long as it's communicated in a respectful way, I'm not yelled at. I know it's to make me better. I know that, it's ultimately because this is what's best for the mission, those kinds of things. Just people who are willing to accept responsibility, be a part of a team, communicate around their needs. Those are kind of the main traits for me. I don't care if you don't know what these vegetables are, you can learn that stuff. Yeah. What's much, much harder to teach is what someone's ability to be straight with someone when something's coming up for them. Some people really shy away from confrontation, things like that can make it really difficult to work with because, it's what are we doing? We're just selling veggies on a truck. Let's just do what we have to do, regroup when we need to. Also, sorry to think of another thing is a lot of stuff comes up and sets off chain reactions of issues. We rammed our garage door and then we couldn't use it anymore. So we had to break down pallets outside. So we had to stage a tent outside so the stuff didn't wilt while we were channeling it on dollies through the office, things like that. Someone who will immediately recognize there's an issue here. Who needs to be contacted? I need to talk to Samantha so we can troubleshoot what's going to go on, because every decision that we make from here on out will have kind of ripple effects down the line of not even just today's markets, but tomorrow's and the next, and then the other folks that we share our space with. So people who are willing to think well or perform well under pressure.
Yeah. Perform well under pressure is a big thing for me and for our team, because we know also mobile markets, you have to sort of think about the multitudes of things going on always, whether it's on site or in preparation for going to a site. And so I think about and ask questions about multitasking, but I ask a lot of questions about how detail oriented they are or can be. And I find that almost with all the tasks that you have to do on a mobile market, it requires attention to detail, whether it's, the POS system or the vegetable or the customer who's asking, who's upset, or the weather that's doing something. That's always so many things that's going on. So can you hold all of these different conflicting things and tasks and priorities that's going on, and how have you demonstrated or done that in the past? And then I think about, and I'm looking for somebody with some community-based experience, that they volunteered in some capacity, that they've been parts of other networks or groups. Because I can teach them about the vehicle or about the vegetables, or I can teach them about the location or the blah, blah, blah. But it's hard to know somebody's or teach the sense of how do you build and be in community? What practices do you have or use or have you used in the past? Or like what's your orientation to, as I said earlier, to being an outsider or in a community where you don't belong. Getting a sense of that, and that's what I want as well. And I don't always look for, do they have market experience? Because that's, again, something you can teach. You can teach somebody how to run a market. But if they come with it, it's nice. It's definitely an advantage. It means less training on my end once they begin. But it's not the overall priority that they come with some of those skills. And we talk about, of course, as we put in the job description, that we look for specific qualities. So if you have some of these qualities, then yes, apply. And then also like what you must have, you can use whatever language you want in your job description, but we have must-haves and then nice-to-haves. And then I think as I go through reviewing candidates, I'm looking at both those qualities and then the must-haves. And often the must-haves are things like being able to lift things all the time, more than 40 pounds, their driving record or experience with vehicles driving that's not their own. Again, the organization or attention to detail. But then some of the nice-to-have things are, whether they can speak or have language capacity outside of English, Spanish or the Arabic or something else that they, do they have supervisory or management experience? We don't require that they have, but if they have some, that's nice because we utilize a lot of volunteers to with the mobile market associate and coordinator. They each have 2 volunteers that they work with on each site. So there's always 3 people. So can they also think about or do they have experience supervising those people on site?
Thanks, Alistar. I appreciate that perspective. I think really quickly, the more and more interviews I did and the more and more staff I brought into our mobile market, I think the number one thing for me outside of kind of those required skills was just an ability to connect with people. I mean, you've all seen your mobile markets and what a community sense when I think they are busy and robust and people are chatting. And so, one of the things I wanted to do as we were trying to build trust in our community, as we were trying to become that resource that people were willing to invest in, it was just an ability to connect with people on a human level. And so I always tried to find ways to seek that out, whether it was just a good vibe in an interview with people, but also asking some of the questions that tried to get at that. So with my experience, we are at time. So let's show our appreciation to both Alistar and Samantha for sharing some of their expertise and having such a great conversation around this topic. Really appreciate both of you. We are hosting monthly webinars these days. So I've got a couple more to schedule come August and September. We will be covering topics such as rural serving mobile markets. I think I've got a really fun conversation planned for that in August. I'd like to put one together to discuss all of these various currencies people are accepting, the Produce RX and the Medicaid cards and WIC e-vouchers and things like that. And so we've got a lot to kind of cover. As always, if you have any questions, any topics that you're interested in either sharing or presenting on or having a conversation around, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I will put my email in the chat really quickly. I'll be sending out this recording and I look forward to connecting with you all here in the coming months. I promise, if you're not a Mobile Market Coalition member yet, it's our fault. And it's because we are kind of held up in some administrative stuff with opening registration through my preferred platform and the university. So I'm working on it. And as soon as we have options for you all to become Mobile Market Coalition members and share in all of the benefits therein, you will know about it as soon as I do. So thanks so much. I hope everybody has a great weekend. Thanks for spending an hour of your Friday with us, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you.